In 1975, a mycologist noticed something genuinely terrifying about painters.
Yeah, it was a pretty extreme observation, honestly.
Right, like he was observing these artists in their studios, and he realized they were so utterly obsessed with the canvases in front of them that they were literally overriding their most basic biological survival drives.
Completely overriding them.
Yeah, they would just stop eating for days. They would completely ignore their thirst. They wouldn't sleep.
And, it wasn't like they were being coerced or tortured. They were doing this entirely voluntarily.
Exactly. So today, we are taking the massive stack of research you, the learner, have handed us, and we are unpacking what is arguably the most elusive, sought-after, and almost magical mental state in all of human psychology.
Most people probably just know it as being in the zone.
Right, but the scientific community calls it flow. And we are going to figure out how to, hijack the strict 110-bit lockdown of the human brain to actually get there.
Because it really is a complete override of human biology. And Mihály Csíkszentmihályi.
Wait, who is that?
He's the Hungarian-American psychologist who first formally studied this. And he didn't set out to create some sort of productivity hack for Silicon Valley executives,
Oh, really?
He was looking at these starving artists and trying to solve a fundamental behavioral mystery. Like, what happens in the human brain that is powerful enough to make a person literally forget they are hungry?
And when he started interviewing these subjects, they all used this very specific, almost poetic metaphor to describe the feeling, right?
Yeah, they didn't say things like, I was working really hard, or I was forcing myself to focus.
No, they used phrases like, it was like floating, or I was carried on by the flow.
Which is just a perfect explanation for the name.
It really is. It's that sensation of being swept up in a river's current, where you don't even have to paddle anymore. You're just, like, moving with the water.
Exactly.
And looking through these notes, the clinical definition that eventually emerged from those early interviews is actually quite beautiful. It's defined as the melting together of action and consciousness.
The melting together of action and consciousness. That is the crucial mechanism right there.
You get so fully immersed in this feeling of, like, energized focus that your sense of time completely distorts.
Because when you are outside of flow, there's this separation between the you, who is making the decision to do a task, and the task itself.
Like you're consciously piloting your body.
Right. But in flow, that separation just vanishes. You are no longer thinking about doing the thing. You simply are the doing of the thing.
Wow.
The ego, the inner critic, the director calling the shots, all of it just goes completely offline.
Okay, let's unpack this. Think of your brain like a smartphone.
Okay, I like that.
On a normal Tuesday morning, you have like 20 apps open in the background. You're trying to write a report. The battery is draining because you're also thinking about what to make for dinner.
Or worrying about some awkward email you sent yesterday.
Yeah, actually. Or you're feeling a little ache in your lower back or wondering if it's going to rain later. All these apps are pinging you with notifications, aggressively dividing your processing power.
Right.
Flow is what happens when you force quit every single app except the exact one you need right in this millisecond. Suddenly, the device runs flawlessly. It's blindingly fast, completely frictionless.
That is a perfect visualization of the cognitive mechanics at play. And this forced quitting of background noise is precisely why flow has become such a massive cornerstone of positive psychology.
In occupational therapy, too, looking at the notes.
Exactly. It's widely used as a coping skill for chronic stress and anxiety. When you can productively pursue a task that perfectly matches your skill set, you are effectively giving your central nervous system a vacation.
A vacation from the exhaustion of divided attention.
Right. You are stepping into a sanctuary of singular focus.
But how does the brain actually pull that off? Because I can sit at my desk and tell myself, force quit the dinner app, stop thinking about pizza, just focus on this spreadsheet.
And 3 minutes later, you're thinking about pepperoni again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If flow's the only app running, how does the brain physically manage to shut the entire rest of the world down?
Well, we have to look at the literal mathematical limits of human attention.
Actual math of it.
Yeah. The human mind is not a bottomless well of processing power. It has a strict biological bottleneck. Psychologists have calculated that the conscious mind can only attend to about 110 bits of information per second.
Wait, 110 bits per second?
Yes.
My home internet processes gigabits per second. 110 bits sounds incredibly low.
It is remarkably small, especially when you consider the sheer volume of sensory data hitting your nervous system at any given moment.
So what does 110 bits actually look like in everyday life?
Well, To put it into a real-world perspective, researchers found that just the act of decoding human speech, like just listening to me talk right now and translating these sounds into meaningful concepts,
Yeah.
that takes about 40 to 60 bits of information per second.
Wait, you're saying just listening to someone speak takes up literally half of my brain's total conscious bandwidth?
Half of your entire conscious capacity is gone just by processing a conversation.
That's what?
But it provides the underlying biological math for a reality we all know. It's why you cannot focus your attention on another complex task while having a deep conversation.
Because if 60 bits are tied up in the conversation, you only have 50 bits left.
Exactly. You can use those remaining 50 bits to fold laundry or walk down the street because those rely on automated motor functions.
But you cannot use them to write a complex line of computer code.
Or solve an algebra equation. The math simply does not allow it.
Oh. This is why when you're driving in a really heavy rainstorm and the traffic suddenly stops and you're lost, you immediately reach over and turn the radio down.
Yes.
You literally need to free up those auditory bits so you can reroute them to your visual processing and decision-making centers.
You are rapidly reallocating your 110 bits to survive a high-stress environment. Now, extrapolate that biological limit to the flow state.
Okay, what happens in flow?
When you enter flow, the task at hand, whether it's painting a canvas, writing a song, analyzing data, it becomes so engaging and requires such a perfect level of challenge that it demands all 110 bits.
Every single bit.
Every single bit of your conscious bandwidth is swallowed by the activity. And because all your attention is mathematically spoken for, there is zero leftover bandwidth to process anything else.
So those starving painters back in 1975, they weren't just showing extreme willpower.
Not at all.
They weren't fighting off hunger pangs. They literally did not have the processing power available to receive the hunger signal from their stomach.
Exactly. Normally, people have the ability to decide what they give their attention to. And basic distinctive feelings like hunger, pain, or, a full bladder.
They usually cut through.
Right, because they are urgent survival signals.
Oh.
But in a state of deep flow, you lose awareness without consciously making the decision to do so.
Wow.
Time, the people walking around you, distractions, basic bodily needs, they literally fail to render in your consciousness. The Hunger app requires maybe 5 bits to run, but your primary task is hoarding all 110.
You cannot feel what you cannot process.
Perfectly.
But hold on. This 110-bit lockdown sounds a lot like something else in the research stack. The sources talk about hyperfocus.
Oh, yes.
Which is often discussed alongside conditions like ADHD, autism, or schizophrenia.
Right.
If someone is hyper-focusing on a video game for 14 hours straight, ignoring their family, not eating, skipping work, they're using all 110 bits too.
Yeah.
So are flow and hyperfocus just two words for the exact same thing?
The distinction between the two is critical.
Because that 14-hour gaming binge doesn't sound like an optimal experience.
Yeah.
It sounds destructive.
And that's exactly the difference. They share the mechanical trait of consuming all available attention, but they are absolutely not the same thing.
Okay, so how do they differ?
Flow is generally framed as an intrinsically rewarding, productive state that leads to a sense of growth and life satisfaction. You feel energized afterward.
Right.
Hyperfocus, conversely, can often capture a person detrimentally.
Bittersweet, that makes it sound like a trap.
In many ways, it is. In a detrimental state of hyperfocus, a person might become obsessively absorbed by one tiny, irrelevant aspect of an assignment to the complete detriment of the overall goal.
Oh, like they start a project and spend 12 hours reorganizing their desktop folders instead of actually doing the work.
Exactly. They are unable to break away. Flow is an optimal, harmonious matching of your skill to a meaningful challenge. Hyperfocus can manifest as a rigid inability to switch gears even when your environment or your well-being desperately demands it.
So flow is like driving a race car flawlessly around a complex track, while hyperfocus is obsessively polishing the steering wheel of that race car for 10 hours while the actual race is happening without you.
That is a very clear way to separate the two. Flow pushes you forward. Hyperfocus can lock you in place.
So if we want the forward momentum of flow, how do we actually get there? Because knowing about the 110-bit limit is great, but it doesn't give me a recipe.
Right, it just explains the engine.
Exactly. How have psychologists mapped out the actual ingredients to trigger this state?
Well, it took decades of debate to isolate the specific architecture of the zone. The foundational work by Gene Nakamura and Csíkszentmihályi identified 6 core factors that encompass a flow experience.
Okay, what are the 6?
First, there is intense and focused concentration on the present moment.
Makes sense.
Second, the merging of action and awareness we discuss. Third, a profound loss of reflective self-consciousness.
Meaning your ego steps out of the room. You stop worrying about how you look while you're doing the task?
Yes. Fourth, a sense of personal control or agency over the situation.
Okay.
Fifth, a distortion of temporal experience. Time either flies by in minutes or seems to stretch out in slow motion.
Right, time distortion.
And the sixth, the activity must be autotelic, meaning it is intrinsically rewarding. You're doing it for the joy of doing it, not for a paycheck or a gold medal.
Got it. But looking at the research stack, psychology writer Kendra Cherry pulled 3 additional components from Csintmihályi's broader work.
He did.
She noted that you also need immediate feedback, a feeling that you have the potential to succeed, and total engrossment where other needs become negligible.
But if you look closely at those 9 traits we just listed, you'll see why the scientific community struggled with this model for a long time.
Why is that?
Because they are a tangled mix of what you need to have before you start the activity and what you actually feel during the activity.
It's confusing the ingredients for a cake with the taste of the cake.
Exactly.
Like, potential to succeed is an ingredient, but distortion of time is the taste.
Exactly the problem. This caused massive inconsistencies in how researchers studied flow. To clean this up, a modern framework was proposed in 2021 by Cameron Norsworthy and his colleagues.
And what did Norsworthy do differently?
His team completely separated the antecedents, the setup conditions, from the experiential dimensions, which is what it actually feels like once you are in it.
Okay, let's look at the setup first. What do I need before I can even hope to enter flow?
According to this updated framework, the overarching antecedents are optimal challenge and high motivation. You have to actively want to engage with the task, and you have to perceive that the challenge is perfectly scaled to your capabilities.
And once I have those 2 things set up, what does the core experience actually consist of?
The experience itself boils down to 3 distinct pillars.
Number 1.
Absorption, that undistracted merging of action and awareness. Number 2, effortless control. Your performance becomes highly fluid, and it feels significantly less strenuous than normal.
And a third pillar.
Intrinsic reward. It generates positive valence. It just feels incredibly good to your nervous system.
So let me ask a clarifying question here. What if I have the absorption and I feel that effortless control, but time doesn't distort for me at all?
Okay.
Like, I am completely aware that exactly 45 minutes have passed while I've been writing. Am I disqualified from being in flow? Does it have to be a perfect royal flush of all these factors?
That's a great question. These aspects can and do appear independently in normal life. You can completely lose track of time while mindlessly scrolling social media, but that isn't flow.
Right.
You can feel a strong sense of control while doing a boring, repetitive assembly line task, but that isn't flow either.
So it really has to be the combination.
Yes. The researchers are very clear that only in combination do these factors constitute a true flow experience. But to trigger that combination, flow theory points to 3 strict, non-negotiable prerequisites.
The 3 golden rules, what are they?
Number 1, the activity must have clear goals and progress. You need structure and direction so your brain isn't wasting bits trying to figure out what to do next.
Makes sense. Number 2?
The task must provide clear and immediate feedback. You have to know instantaneously how well you are doing so your brain can adjust your performance millisecond by millisecond.
And number 3?
The absolute anchor of the entire theory, a good balance between the perceived challenges of the task and your perceived skills.
That phrase, balance between challenge and skill, is really the beating heart of all this research. And it's not just a poetic idea. The researchers actually mapped this balance out geographically, didn't they?
They did. They created one of the most famous visual representations in modern psychology. In 1987, Fausto Massimini, Csintmihályi, and Massimo Carli published the 8-channel model of flow.
I think some researchers in the notes, like Antonella Delfay, refer to it as the experience fluctuation model.
Yes, that's another common name for it.
Since you are listening to this and can't see the graph, let's visualize it together. Imagine a steering wheel with 8 spokes radiating out from the middle.
Okay.
The dead center of the wheel is your average, everyday baseline state. Moving horizontally to the right means your skill level is increasing. Moving vertically up toward the top means the challenge level is increasing.
And the further you move away from that baseline center point in any direction, the more intense your psychological state becomes.
Right. And flow exists in only one very specific slice of this wheel. It is the top right sector. the exact sweet spot where you are facing a higher than average challenge and you are deploying above average skills to meet it.
But the true genius of the experience fluctuation model is that it also maps out the enemies of flow.
The enemies.
Yeah, it shows you exactly what psychological state you enter when that delicate balance breaks down. For instance, what happens if you move to the bottom left of the graph? That is the sector of low challenge and low skill.
That is apathy. You don't care because the task is ridiculously easy and you aren't using any of your talents anyway. It's like washing a single spoon.
Exactly. Now move to the bottom right. The challenge is incredibly low, but your skill is incredibly high.
Boredom. You have immense talent, but the task is completely beneath your capabilities. Your brain is starved for stimulation.
And then we go to the top left, the absolute opposite of flow. High challenge, but low skill.
Anxiety. The task is overwhelmingly, terrifyingly difficult, and you do not have the tools or the knowledge to handle it. You are basically drowning.
Right. And this map gives us an incredibly practical toolkit for managing our own minds.
How so?
Csíkszentmihályi's advice is brilliantly simple. If you find yourself in the boredom sector because the challenges are too low, you get back to flow by actively increasing the difficulty. Make it harder for yourself.
Okay, and if you're in the anxiety sector?
If you are anxious because the challenges are too great, you return to flow by studying, practicing, and learning new skills to meet the challenge.
So what does this all mean? Think about driving a manual transmission car.
Okay, I'm with you.
The gears are your skill level, and the incline of the road is the challenge. Anxiety, that top left sector, is when you're stuck in fifth gear trying to drive up a massive steep mountain. The engine is shuddering, it's stalling out, you're rolling backward. It's pure distress.
Great analogy.
Boredom, the bottom right sector, is being stuck in first gear while driving on a flat, open highway. The engine is screaming at 7,000 RPMs, it's wildly inefficient, and you aren't getting anywhere despite having all this horsepower. Flow is shifting into the perfect gear for your exact speed and the exact incline of the road. The engine quiets down and the car just glides.
It's the perfect alignment of capability and environmental demand. However, we do have to look at the scientific debate surrounding this 8-channel model.
Oh, there's pushback.
Yes. Fascinating textual pushback from other researchers who claim the math doesn't always add up as neatly as the graph suggests.
Where does the map break down? It seems so logical.
Well, the critics point out a significant flaw in how the model defines a match. The graph assumes that any time you are simultaneously above your personal average in both skill and challenge, you are in flow.
Right.
But studies argue that individuals with a very low baseline of skills and a high baseline of challenges don't necessarily experience a magical match just because both happen to be elevated on a given Tuesday. The central precondition of flow is the actual equilibrium between the two, not just that they are both high. Furthermore, researchers found a massive anomaly.
Oh, kind of anomaly.
They found that situations of low challenge that were easily surpassed by high skill, the very definition of boredom on the graph, were actually reported by many participants as highly enjoyable, relaxing, and happy states.
You know, that makes total sense, though.
Really?
Yeah. Sometimes being incredibly overqualified for a simple task is deeply soothing. Think about a professional Michelin star chef happily chopping carrots for a basic stew on their day off.
Oh, okay.
The challenge is virtually zero. Their skill is astronomical. It's not boredom. It's a breather. It feels good to be completely competent without being pushed.
That's a great point. Human psychology constantly resists being put into perfectly neat boxes. But this raises another profound question in the research.
Which is?
If hitting that perfect top right sector requires such a delicate equilibrium of high skill and high challenge, are some people just naturally better at finding it?
Are some individuals genetically or psychologically predisposed to enter flow? Which brings us to the autotelic personality. The sources dive deep into this. And the word itself comes from two Greek roots. Autos, meaning self, and telos, meaning end or goal.
Right.
So an autotelic person is someone who does things for their own sake. The activity itself is the goal, not the byproduct of the activity.
Csíkszentmihályi hypothesized that people with certain intrinsic personality traits achieve flow much more easily than the rest of the population.
What kind of traits?
These individuals exhibit immense curiosity, stubborn persistence, a notably low sense of egotism, and a high propensity to do things just because they find them fascinating.
Rather than doing them for external rewards like money, status, or fame.
Exactly.
They just love playing the game. They couldn't care less about the trophy at the end.
Yeah.
And the research actually mapped these traits onto the famous Big Five personality model.
Yes, the data shows a very clear correlation. Autotelic personalities tend to score very high in extroversion and agreeableness, with some overlap in conscientiousness and openness to experience.
But why those specific traits, though? What does being an extrovert have to do with getting lost in a painting or a spreadsheet?
It comes down to how these traits dictate your interaction with the environment. High extroversion means an individual is oriented outward. They are constantly seeking engagement and stimulation from the world around them.
Which gives them more opportunities to find challenging tasks.
Exactly. And high agreeableness often correlates with being less defensive and less ego-driven.
Oh, that's interesting.
If your ego isn't constantly trying to protect itself from failure or judgment, it is much easier to surrender that ego to the task at hand, which, as we established, is a core requirement of flow.
That makes a lot of sense. Your ego isn't taking up 40 bits of bandwidth worrying about what people think of you.
Exactly. And a study by Abu Hamda in 2000 found a defining behavioral characteristic of these individuals. They actively prefer and seek out high-action, high-skill situations. They are drawn to the friction of growth.
So they aren't looking for the easy way out.
Not at all. Experimental evidence also shows they possess an internal locus of control. They believe they are the architects of their own destiny, rather than victims of external fate, which gives them the agency to tackle challenges head-on.
But reading through this stack, there's a massive, glaring roadblock when it comes to study these autotelic people.
The measurement problem.
Yes. How do you actually measure this stuff? You can't put a blood pressure cuff on someone and get a reading of 120/80 flow units.
You really can't.
And self-reporting is notoriously terrible, especially for a mental state where the entire point is that you lose your sense of self-awareness. You can't be aware that you are in flow without instantly knocking yourself out of flow.
It is arguably the greatest methodological conundrum in positive psychology. How do you measure the invisible without destroying it?
So what do researchers do?
They've developed 3 primary avenues to attempt this. The first is the Flow Questionnaire, or FQ.
How does that one work?
The FQ presents individuals with written definitions and descriptions of flow, and then asks them to identify situations in their past where they believe they have experienced something similar.
Okay, seems straightforward.
The strength of the FQ is its ability to estimate the general prevalence of flow across a wide population. However, it is fundamentally weak when it comes to measuring the intensity of the flow state during specific activities.
And I imagine it completely fails to accurately measure the ratio of challenge to skill.
Completely.
So it's decent for a broad survey like, have you ever felt this?
Yeah.
But useless for asking, how deep into the zone were you and what was the math behind it?
Right.
What's the second method?
The second is the experience sampling method, or ESM, and this is where the methodology gets incredibly invasive.
Invasive how?
In the ESM, subjects are given a device. Historically, it was a physical pager. Today, it's usually a smartphone app. This device is programmed to beep at 8 randomly chosen intervals throughout the waking day. When it beeps, the subject must immediately stop what they're doing and fill out an experience sampling form.
Wait. Stop what they are doing.
Yes. They fill out 13 categorical items, what they're doing, who they're with, where they are, and 29 scaled items to measure their subjective psychological feelings at the exact second the pager went off.
Hold on. Wait a second.
Yeah.
If I understand the core definition of flow, the 110-bit lockdown, the total absorption, the melting of action and consciousness, doesn't this method completely destroy the exact state it's trying to measure?
That is the paradox.
If Schaefer's conditions for flow require absolute freedom from distractions, aren't the researchers just hitting people in the face with a pager beep to ask if they are distracted?
It is the psychological equivalent of the observer effect in quantum physics. The very act of observing the phenomenon alters the phenomenon. And the researchers are fully aware of this paradox.
Do they admit it's a flawed system?
The literature openly admits that the ESM is highly complex and that the possible biases make it a very risky methodological choice. When scientists use the ESM, they are relying on the subject's ability to accurately recall the precise mental state they were in milliseconds before the loud beep shattered it.
That seems almost impossible to verify.
It requires meticulous statistical coding to separate the actual flow state from the annoyance of being interrupted.
That sounds like trying to measure the stillness of a pond by throwing a rock into it.
That's a great way to put it.
What is the third method then? Surely there's something more reliable.
The third approach involves standardized scales, developed primarily by researcher Susan Jackson and her colleagues. They created psychometrically validated surveys.
Like what?
The most famous are the FSS2, designed to measure flow as a temporary state immediately after an event, and the DFS2, which measures flow as a long-term dispositional trait.
So they survey you right after instead of interrupting you during.
Exactly. These scales provide a much more complete, nuanced perspective without the random interruptions. And more recently, scientists developed the psychological flow scale to create a unified model that can be used across completely different scientific disciplines.
So science is doing its absolute best to put a ruler next to a ghost.
Basically, yes.
But while measuring an individual's flow is clearly a messy, complicated business, the research gets infinitely wilder when we introduce other human beings into the equation. Let's talk about group flow.
This is a vital evolution in the field, because for decades, flow is viewed strictly as a solitary, isolated experience, the starving artist alone in the studio.
Right.
But the data reveals a distinctly separate phenomenon called group flow, or team flow, and it's crucial to differentiate this from what we call synchronized solitary flow.
Right. Synchronized solitary flow is just a room full of people experiencing their own individual flow states at the same time, like a library full of college students cramming for finals.
Exactly. They are physically occupying the same space, but psychologically, they are all on their own isolated islands. They aren't interacting.
But true group flow is different.
True group flow is inherently mutual, interdependent, and interpersonal. The presence and actions of the other people are not incidental. They are the catalyst for the flow state itself.
Wow.
A review by Pels and colleagues highlights that group contexts introduce entirely new variables that cause individuals to act, think, and feel fundamentally differently than they ever would alone.
The examples in the notes around music perfectly illustrate this. Think about a jazz band playing live. Drummers describe a phenomenon they call getting into the groove or experiencing entrainment.
Entrainment, yes.
It's a state where they sense a collective, invisible energy that literally drives the tempo. They aren't just one person keeping time with a metronome.
And bassists and drummers talk about being in the pocket.
Yes. When they are in the pocket, they feel the downbeat together. They aren't reading the sheet music anymore. They are communicating telepathically through the rhythm of the group.
And this isn't just romantic, poetic language used by musicians. There is hard, empirical, physiological proof that this shared state is real.
Wait, really? Physiological proof?
Yes. Research by Snydowin investigated the underlying physiology of group flow, and the findings are absolutely remarkable.
What did they find?
When a group of people simultaneously report being in a state of flow together, researchers observe actual, measurable correlations in their physiological responses. Specifically, their cardiovascular triggers begin to align.
Hold on. Here's where it gets really interesting. If their cardiovascular triggers are syncing up, that means this is way more than just a shared good mood or a good rehearsal.
It's much deeper.
It's almost like a flock of birds turning at the exact same millisecond in the sky. It's not just a mental state anymore.
Yeah.
Their actual literal hearts are responding to the same shared environmental stressors at the exact same time. The biology is physically syncing up.
It is a profound level of human integration, facilitated entirely by shared attention and optimal collective challenge. It proves that group flow bridges the gap between individual minds and shared biology.
That is mind-blowing.
And this mind-body connection isn't just reserved for musicians jamming in a studio. It has profound and sometimes deeply bizarre implications in high-stakes, hyper-competitive environments. Which brings us into the realm of extreme flow.
Professional sports.
Exactly.
Anyone who has ever watched an athletic event has heard the cliche of an athlete being in the zone. But the qualitative research here is staggering.
It really is.
Researcher Susan Jackson conducted a study on NCAA Division I college athletes, and she found that 94% of them described their flow state as a merging of action and awareness that felt entirely effortless and automatic. 94%.
That's nearly universal at that elite level.
But when you look at the anecdotes from the absolute elite peak of professional sports, they read like science fiction.
They do. Let's examine the accounts detailed in the source material. Take the legendary Formula One driver Ayrton Senna.
Oh, this story is wild.
He is describing his experience during the qualifying rounds for the 1988 Monaco Grand Prix. Now, Monaco is notoriously one of the most dangerous, demanding, and unforgiving street circuits in the world. It requires superhuman reflexes just to survive it, let alone dominate it.
Right.
Senna explained that he was already on pole position, but he just kept going faster and faster. He stated, "Suddenly, I was nearly 2 seconds faster than anybody else, and suddenly I realized that I was no longer driving the car consciously."
No longer driving the car consciously.
He said, "I was driving it by a kind of instinct, only I was in a different dimension. It was like I was in a tunnel."
He was piloting a screaming metal missile through narrow city streets purely on subconscious reflex.
Exactly. And then there is the account from former 500cc Grand Prix motorcycle rider Wayne Gardner.
The Australian Grand Prix one.
Yes, his victory at the 1990 Australian Grand Prix. He claimed that during the last 5 laps of that race, he had a literal out-of-body experience.
Literal out-of-body.
He said he was raised up above the physical track, and he could literally see himself racing the motorcycle from a top-down perspective.
Oh my.
He described it as driving by remote control and called it the weirdest thing he'd ever experienced. After the race, his rivals asked him how he pulled off such impossible maneuvers, and his honest answer was, "I have no idea."
He had completely surrendered his conscious ego, bypassing the prefrontal cortex entirely, and handed the controls over to the 110-bit processing power of the subconscious flow state.
We see this mechanical surrender across multiple disciplines. Timothy Galway's highly influential work on the inner game of sports like tennis and golf is entirely based on the premise that the goal of the athlete is to bypass the critical overthinking mind.
Just let the body's muscle memory perform unhindered.
Exactly. Roy Palmer suggested that flow better integrates our conscious intentions with our subconscious reflex functions, drastically improving physical coordination.
And we even see this in combat sports, where the stakes are literal physical damage. Lyoto Machida, the former mixed martial arts champion, uses deep meditation to achieve a state called mushin before stepping into the octagon.
Which translates roughly to no mind.
Right. And based on his description, it is entirely synonymous with flow. You see similar concepts in ancient yoga traditions like Raja Yoga with the practice of Samayama.
Which is total psychological absorption into the object of meditation.
But I have to ask a question that seems completely counterintuitive.
Sure.
If Wayne Gardner is literally having an out-of-body experience, or if a UFC fighter is completely on autopilot with no mind, while someone is trying to kick them in the head, how do they actually perform better?
It is the most logical question to ask.
Right. If I stop consciously thinking while I'm driving my Honda Civic, I'm going to crash into a mailbox. Shouldn't a total lack of conscious thought lead to sloppy, dangerous mistakes?
To understand the mechanism of how no mind leads to better performance, we have to look at an incredible study involving professional classical pianists.
What do they do?
Researchers hooked these expert pianists up to physiological monitors and had them play highly complex pieces specifically chosen to induce a flow state.
Okay.
What they found was that as the pianists entered deep flow, their heart rates actually decreased. Their blood pressure dropped significantly. The major facial muscles physically relaxed.
Wait, really?
Yes. Yet despite this profound physiological relaxation, their musical performance objectively improved in precision and emotional resonance.
Their bodies chilled out, but their execution got sharper. Why?
Because flow is what cognitive scientists call effortless attention. When you are a highly skilled expert like a Grand Prix rider or a concert pianist, your muscles, your basal ganglia, and your subconscious nervous system already know exactly what to do.
They have the programming locked in from thousands of hours of practice.
Exactly. The conscious mind, with all its doubts, fears, ego, and micro-hesitations, actually creates neurological friction. It gets in the way of the programming. By consuming all 110 bits of bandwidth with pure absorption in the task, flow entirely eliminates the friction of conscious doubt. The subconscious takes over the mechanics, and the performance becomes flawless precisely because it is unimpeded by overthinking.
The conscious mind is the bottleneck, not the engine.
Perfectly said.
So if this state creates such peak frictionless performance, the natural next question for society is, can we artificially engineer the zone? Can we force people into it?
Because if we can, the implications for how we learn, how we work, and how we interact with technology are massive.
Exactly. And that is exactly what the latter half of this research stack explores, the systemic engineering of the zone.
Let's look at 3 specific arenas where flow theory has been actively weaponized: education, gamification, and the workplace.
Let's start with education. We know from research by Schuler and Brunner that flow significantly increases student engagement, information recall, and knowledge acquisition.
If a kid is fully absorbed, they learn faster.
Right. But the research also talks about the concept of overlearning.
Csikszentmihalyi argued that overlearning enables the mind to concentrate on visualizing a desired performance as a singular, integrated, fluid action, rather than a clunky set of individual, disjointed steps.
But what's truly fascinating is how early technology attempted to artificially induce this educational flow. Long before modern computers, in the 1950s, a British cybernetician named Gordon Pask designed an adaptive teaching machine called Sakai.
1950s e-learning. That is practically retrofuturism.
Yeah. How did a machine from the 1950s induce flow?
In his 1956 patent application, Pask essentially wrote the engineering blueprint for flow without ever using the word.
What does he write?
He noted a fundamental flaw in human learning. If a human operator receives data at too slow a rate, they become bored and their attention drifts to irrelevant environmental data.
Makes sense.
If the task is too precise and easy, again, boredom sets in. But if the data is too complicated or presented too fast, the operator is unable to deal with it, becomes wildly discouraged, and completely loses interest.
Boredom on one side, anxiety on the other. He literally described the experience fluctuation model 30 years before it was published.
Exactly. Pask concluded that to learn efficiently, the machine must dynamically present data that is complex enough to maintain peak interest, but never so complex as to cause despair. It has to constantly algorithmically adapt to the user's growing skill level in real time.
And we see this exact pedagogical philosophy applied in physical classrooms, too. Around the year 2000, Csíkszentmihályi and Kevin Rathund conducted a multi-year study comparing traditional middle schools to Montessori educational settings.
What did they find when they compared the two?
They found that the Montessori method, which famously allows students more autonomy to pursue optimally challenging tasks at their own pace, purposefully sets up continuous flow opportunities.
The empirical research supported that.
Yes. The observation showed that students achieve flow experiences significantly more frequently in Montessori settings than in traditional rigid classrooms where every student is forced to move at the exact same pace, regardless of their individual skill level.
So education is desperately trying to hit that sweet spot. But you know who has absolutely perfected the science of hitting that sweet spot?
Video game designers.
Unquestionably. The sources dedicate significant space to the mechanics of flow in gaming. Game design is, at its core, applied flow theory.
How so?
The research connects flow in gaming to the fundamental laws of learning: readiness, exercise, effect, and intensity. Because flow requires immediate, unambiguous feedback, games are the absolute perfect medium.
Because you press a button and the character jumps immediately. Constant feedback loops.
Exactly.
But what blew my mind in these notes is how game developers use the deliberate imbalance of skill and challenge thematically to manipulate your emotions.
Manipulate how?
If you are playing a survival horror game, the developers purposefully keep the environmental challenges significantly above your level of competency. They restrict your ammunition, they make the enemies move erratically and too fast, they obscure your vision.
They are actively trying to push your brain into the top left sector of the graph.
Yes, anxiety, that's what makes it a horror game.
Wow.
And conversely, relaxation games like farming simulators purposefully keep the challenge significantly below your competency to induce a relaxing, low-stakes state.
It is masterful emotional manipulation through challenge calibration. The literature specifically highlights designer Genova Chen.
Oh, his master's thesis game.
Yes. His thesis was a deep exploration of how to design a video game that dynamically adjusts its own difficulty based on the player's subconscious behavior. It ensures they stay locked in the flow state regardless of their initial skill level.
He literally titled the resulting game Flow, right?
He did. Furthermore, the research introduces a broader framework called the HMSM.
The Hedonic Motivation System Adoption Model. It's a very clunky acronym for a very powerful concept.
It really is. It explains the why behind our behavior. Why do we adopt and endlessly obsess over intrinsically motivated computer systems? Not just gaming, but social networking, online shopping, and virtual worlds.
And what's the answer?
The model relies heavily on a concept called cognitive absorption. Cognitive absorption encompasses joy, control, curiosity, focused immersion, and temporal dissociation.
All the flow traits.
Exactly. By understanding the precise mechanics of how to trigger cognitive absorption, software developers can create incredibly sticky, engaging, and sometimes addictive digital environments.
Which naturally leads us to the final arena, the workplace.
The holy grail for management consultants.
Exactly. Because if management can figure out how to make an employee as cognitively absorbed in a quarterly revenue spreadsheet as they are in a PlayStation game, they have solved the corporate productivity crisis forever.
Csintmihályi himself wrote a book titled Good Business, emphasizing that the workplace can and should be engineered for flow through what he calls serious play.
But how do you actually do that?
The notes cite a fascinating study by Nielsen and Cleel, who went into actual workplaces using a 9-item scale to examine what activities genuinely predict flow at work. Their findings completely upend traditional corporate thinking.
What did they find?
They found that stable job characteristics, like having a clear role definition or general organizational influence, do absolutely nothing to predict flow.
So just having a fancy job title and a clear job description doesn't put you in the zone?
Not at all. What predicts flow are transient, dynamic activities. Things like active project planning, intense group brainstorming, and acute high-pressure problem solving.
It is the verb, not the noun, that triggers flow.
Exactly. The active, friction-filled process of overcoming a present novel challenge is what engages the 110 bits.
So whether we are talking about Gordon Pask's 1950s robot tutor, a modern PlayStation game adjusting to your reflexes, or a corporate brainstorming session, the underlying math is absolutely identical across all of them.
How would you summarize it?
You are constantly trying to perfectly match the weight on the barbell to the exact strength of the person lifting it in that specific fleeting moment.
That is the essence of engineering the zone. But there is one more application mentioned in your research that elevates this entire concept from a clever productivity hack to a genuine potential medical breakthrough.
Oh, you mean flow-induced analgesia?
Yes.
Analgesia, meaning pain relief. That sounds like an absolute superpower, honestly.
It practically is, and it brings us right back to the mathematics of bandwidth.
The 110 bits again.
Right.
Yeah.
Because true flow requires all 110 bits of conscious bandwidth to maintain. Emerging conceptual frameworks suggest that deep task engagement can actually modulate how the brain perceives physical pain.
Modulate it. Like, turn it down.
Literally override it. The central pain modulation network in the nervous system can be overridden. In states of deep flow, the brain vastly reduces its perception of physical pain because it simply does not have the remaining processing power to allocate to the pain signal.
So the signal is sent by the body, but the brain refuses to render it.
Precisely.
So those starving artists back in 1975, from the very beginning of our discussion, they weren't just toughing out the hunger and the cramped muscles and the fatigue.
No, they weren't.
Their brains were literally producing a localized analgesic effect to keep them glued to the easel.
Yeah.
That is unbelievable.
It is a profound testament to the power of directed human attention. However, before we wrap up this deep dive, we have to confront a massive, uncomfortable paradox in the source material.
Okay, what's the paradox?
It is the chicken and egg problem of flow and success. We have decades of data showing that flow produces incredible outcomes. Positive affect, psychological growth towards complexity, even reduced delinquent behavior in at-risk adolescents.
Right. The research includes a study from the University of Malaga involving 328 youth soccer players. It clearly showed that the athletes who played in higher, more competitive leagues, the ones with higher objective skills, experienced less competitive anxiety and found themselves in flow much more often.
And there was another study out of Alexandria University.
The one with the novice tennis and field hockey players?
Yes. They watched slow-motion mental training clips. This induced a relaxed, flow-like psychological state, and their actual physical performance spiked. They hit better forehands just by mentally entering the zone beforehand.
So the outcomes seem overwhelmingly, universally positive.
They do, but here is the paradox, and the scientific literature admits this openly. The evidence regarding better performance in flow situations is actually highly mixed when you look closely at the data.
Mixed? How?
The fundamental question is one of causality. Does being in a flow state actually cause you to perform better? Or does the fact that you are already performing really well simply make it much more likely that you will enter a flow state?
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about the reverse causality at all.
It's a huge issue.
So am I hitting the tennis ball flawlessly because I'm deep in the zone, or am I in the zone because I just happen to hit 3 really lucky, perfect tennis balls in a row, and now I'm feeling incredibly confident?
Precisely the issue. And a longitudinal study conducted in an academic context, which is cited in your sources, offers a very sobering conclusion to this debate.
What did the longitudinal study find?
It indicates that the causal effect of flow on performance is actually quite small. The strong relationship we observe between the two is largely driven by the effect of performance on flow.
Performing well is the trigger, not just the magical result.
Yes.
That is a major paradigm shift. If the causality is backwards, it makes you wonder, what else is muddy in the research? What are the other major scientific criticisms of flow theory?
The scientific pushback centers heavily on two main areas. First is a severe lack of clarity and operationalization.
Meaning what, exactly?
Critics argue that Csintmihályi's theory, while conceptually beautiful, lacks consistent objective guidelines for measuring it. As we discussed with the varying questionnaire methods, it's virtually impossible to build a standardized scientific framework when the definitions and measurement tools keep shifting depending on who is running the study.
That makes sense. And the second criticism?
Second, critics fiercely attack the assumption of homogeneity.
Homogeneity meaning that flow is exactly the same for everyone, everywhere.
Yes. Csintmihályi's early work implies that flow has a universal, consistent quality across everyone and every activity.
But critics disagree.
Strongly. Modern critics argue that flow experiences likely vary wildly depending on personal characteristics, deeply ingrained cultural factors, and the specific situational context.
So the flow state of a Japanese martial artist achieving mushin through years of spiritual discipline
Might be fundamentally different neurologically and chemically than an American teenager playing a horror video game, even if they share some superficial bandwidth characteristics.
So even after 50 years of intense psychological research, science is still struggling to put a universal ruler next to this experience.
They are heavily debating it, yes.
They still can't entirely agree on what the ruler should even look like.
Which is exactly why Norsworthy's 2021 three-dimensional conceptualization, which we discussed earlier, is considered so vital right now.
Because it splits the antecedents from the experience.
By finally separating the setup conditions from the actual subjective feeling, Norsworthy is attempting to create a universal, standardized language that is accessible across all scientific disciplines.
From occupational therapy to sports psychology to video game design.
Exactly. It's a massive attempt to finally unify the science of the optimal experience.
Well, looking back at the massive journey we just took through this research, it's incredible how far this concept has traveled. We started with starving artists in the 1970s, whose brains were overriding their need to eat.
We broke down the hard biological math of the 110-bit bandwidth limit.
And why you turn down the radio in traffic. We mapped out the 8 channels of the human mind, realizing that anxiety and boredom are just warning lights on the dashboard.
We looked at Grand Prix drivers having literal out-of-body experiences at 200 miles an hour.
And we explored how game designers and corporate managers are actively trying to hack our neurobiology to keep us perfectly optimally challenged. The math of flow might be incredibly complex, and the scientists might still be arguing over the exact definitions and causality. But the pursuit of that optimal experience, that fleeting feeling of effortless control, is one of the most deeply human things there is. We all just want to find our perfect gear.
It is the lifelong pursuit of a mind fully engaged, living entirely in the present, one deeply absorbed moment at a time.
And before we go, I want to leave you, the learner, with one final thought to mull over, something that builds purely on the mechanics we've discussed today.
What's the thought?
Think about flow-induced analgesia, the reality that the brain literally blocks out physical pain signals when its bandwidth is consumed, combined with the dynamic difficulty algorithms created by game designers like Genova Chen.
Oh, wow. I see where you're going with this.
If deep task engagement literally turns down the brain's perception of physical pain because all 110 bits are occupied, could we theoretically map out and gamify the rehabilitation of chronic illness?
That is a staggering concept.
What if the hospitals of the future don't just prescribe heavy addictive medication, but instead prescribe hyper-calibrated autotelic video games or cognitive challenges? Challenges perfectly designed by an AI to consume every single one of your 110 bits of bandwidth, literally locking out the neurological signal for pain while your body heals.
A truly fascinating possibility that bridges the gap between psychology and physical healing.
To the learner, thank you for bringing us such an incredible, thought-provoking stack of sources. You've given us a lot to think about, and hopefully we've given you the shortcut you needed to understand the mechanics of your own mind. Until next time.